You stay on the line, Tom, because I want you to hear Steve in Plasto. Yes, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, hi, George.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm so wound. It sounds like you've got the weakest 9/11 supporter being destroyed by Fred the Cabbie.
Well, first of all, I'm not a 9/11 supporter. I report on these people.
Okay, listen.
Okay.
What I want to say to you is this. There's a lot of misinformation out there, George. There's stupid stuff on the internet that says aliens did it, and rays from space, and all kinds of stupid stuff.
May I respond, George?
No,
Okay.
well, just finish your point, Steve.
Yeah,
Sure.
What I'm trying to say is this. Forget it all. Forget the Twin Towers. What matters is Building 7. It came down at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. No plane hit it. There were minor fires on 2 floors. And it collapsed with a kink in the middle, exactly the same as every demolition that's ever happened. If you look at demolitions of any building, of any substantial structure, they kink in the middle where they take out the central core of the building, and then it collapses in on its own footprint. Building 7 collapsed at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, never having been hit by an aeroplane,
Well,
with 2
Steve,
minor fires on 2 floors.
Steve, Tom didn't get the chance to develop into... he's got a lot to say about Building 7, and he's got a lot to say about the Pentagon, and he's got a lot to say about the U.S. government and its military response, the fact that aircraft didn't go up to intervene with these hijacked airliners and so on. So he didn't even get into his stride. That's why he's going to have to come back tomorrow night. But Tom, I think it's also your case that Building 7 is decisive in this argument.
Well, yes, and let me respond to the caller's first point. There's even a reason. I feel bad. The cab driver just agreed with me that 9/11 was a psychological operation. It was designed to inflict psychological damage. Okay, in that situation, it's very reasonable to expect that some people in their search for answers are going to talk about aliens. I'm not surprised when a massive psychological operation causes such damage. I don't agree with them, but I understand why people can be that upset, all right, number one. Number two, he's also right when he says there's a lot of disinformation. Some of it, apparently, in my opinion, I want to be clear about that, this is my opinion, comes from your very own BBC. Okay, the BBC reported that this Building 7 collapsed a full 15 minutes or so before it actually did. Okay? Yeah. Let me repeat that. The BBC had word, or they say it was a cock-up or what have you, but somehow out of the thousands of buildings in New York City, okay, they had that one picked out and said that it collapsed before it did. Now, this must be a touchy subject for the BBC because they seem to feel bad about it, so they keep going back to this Building 7. Apparently you guys have a program on your BBC called The Conspiracy Files or something like that?
Yes.
And they did a special 1-hour program on this mysterious collapse of Building 7. And I found it to be full of what I consider to be disinformation. And I even spoke with the producer about it when they came to New York again. This program came out in February of 2007, I believe, and September of 2007, or in any case, it was this last September, 2008 rather. I spoke with the producer of the program, and I confronted him with some of my questions about it. I'll give you an example, okay? There is evidence of a high-tech explosive, or I should say a high-tech weapon being used in the demolition or the collapse, I should say, of the 2 World Trade Center towers and Building 7. This was put forth by a physicist from Brigham Young University. His name is Stephen Jones. And because of the massive amount of molten iron that was found in the basements of all 3 of these buildings, okay, and there is some video, actually, you can look at it if you go to YouTube and ask to see thermite, okay, and World Trade Center, WTC, you'll see what appears to be molten metal pouring out of the South Tower just moments before it collapsed. Now, there's a high-tech substance called thermite that the military develops into even more specialized nanothermite and so forth, that's capable of getting hot enough to melt steel in a matter of moments, but it produces a lot of molten iron in the meanwhile. We had pools of this stuff in the bottom of all three buildings for weeks and weeks, unexplained, heretofore unexplained. Well, another thing, for those of you who are familiar with metal, you know, when you melt metal and you throw it through the air, in its liquid form, it tends to form in the form of a ball, okay? These were the old shot towers of old, where they used to melt lead at the top and they dropped them through what looks like a chimney that hit a pool of water at the bottom. In the air, the molten metal forms a ball, okay, and when it hits the water, it gets cold. They used to collect them, and the ones that were nice and round, they'd use for shot. That's what metal does when it's melted and it's hurled through the air. Well, the physicist Stephen Jones from Brigham Young University found what he calculates to be millions and millions of tiny iron spheres in the dust from September the 11th, okay? The BBC goes to great lengths to talk about this. I was very interested to see what they would say. They interviewed a young man who collected a sample of the dust from the beginning of the Brooklyn Bridge and gave it to this physicist, who then examined it, and he found a lot of interesting things in it, but he found these tiny, tiny melted, now hard iron balls. This supports his theory of the substance being used. Well, the BBC goes to put forth an explanation. I hope your listeners are sitting down. What I'm about to tell you is remarkable. They say perhaps this was the result of the rescue workers' cutting torches, that these little balls came flying out. Well, I've come to call this the BBC tiny flying balls theory. Okay, because let me explain, good friends. The Brooklyn Bridge, at the spot where this guy found it, is almost a mile away from ground zero, okay? So how a welder's torch could cause a tiny ball to fly through the air almost a mile, I'll never know. But it's even better than that. These are magic balls because the dust got there immediately. Within seconds, I know I was almost killed by it, okay? And the rescue workers did not show up for quite some time later, okay? So why is it that the BBC feels so compelled to give us a red herring like that on a very, very serious piece of evidence about what happened?
Well, let me bring in another caller, Tom. Here's Eddie in Guildford. Go ahead, Eddie.
Hello, George. I think it might be valuable, instead of getting bogged down with the detail, to ask the crime of 9/11, who benefits? And I'd like to answer that, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
4 American oil companies now legally own all the Iraqi oil. That's the world's largest, cheapest supply of oil. And they're now selling it in the American dollar instead of the euro, as Saddam used to do. The Americans are building an oil and gas pipeline across Afghanistan now. They've done a deal with Uzbekistan for the oil and gas. The Americans would not have been able to invade Iraq or Afghanistan if it wasn't for 9/11. So I would say that whoever committed the crime of 9/11, the Americans now have changed the world supply of oil and gas very much in their favour. So they're the ones who have benefited from the crime.
Well, on that, I think we can all agree. And just before I come back to Tom, let's take some more messages.